Hello, true believers. This is Hank Garner.
This is M.A. Phipps.
Hey, this is Eamon Ambrose.
This is Justin Sloan, and you're listening to
30-minute author interviews
with my buddy,
Preston Lay.
Woohoo! Welcome, everybody, to this edition of 30-Minute Author Interviews. Our guest today is Terry R. Hill. Thank you for joining us today for 30-Minute Author Interviews.
My pleasure, Preston. Enjoy it.
We've started out this podcast a little bit differently the past couple episodes. I start out by asking you to give me 2 truths and 1 lie about yourself and see if I can guess which one is the lie, and I haven't been very good so far. So if you don't mind, can you give me 2 truths and a lie about yourself and let me try to guess what the lie is?
Absolutely. See how we can do it this morning. Okay. I have been inside the Space Shuttle while it's on the launch pad. I have made it to the base camp on Mount Everest, but had to come down due to altitude sickness. And I have physically hammered away on the Berlin Wall when it came down.
Okay. Let's see if I can get my logic on guessing behind this one. I know you work for NASA, but I don't know if you've been on the shuttle during launch. The Mount Everest one sounds good. That'd be kind of cool. And then the Berlin Wall. Man, I'm going to lose on this one again. I'm going to guess somehow the being on the space shuttle on the launch pad is not the correct one. It's the lie.
No.
Dang it.
That's actually true.
Nice. That is awesome. So which one is the lie?
The lie has to do with Mount Everest. I had not been mountain climbing.
Okay.
Yep.
So you've been on the space shuttle on a launch pad?
Yep, a couple of times. A part of my job. 2 different occasions for 2 different jobs I had. One had to do with after the last shuttle accident. I led up one of the teams to develop a tile repair capability. So we had to actually crawl into the shuttle and install the hardware and chemicals and everything inside the shuttle before launch because of the material wouldn't last that long.
Okay.
So we had to save every minute we can. And then the second time I worked for the engineering spacesuit team for 10 years, and been on the shuttles a couple of times to install the suits before launch.
That is awesome. So what is it you do now for NASA?
What is that to do now? Well, it changes about every 6 months to 3 years that you ask me. Jack of all trades, master none. Is that really what it is? I just finished 4 years being the deputy program manager for the astronaut health program, and just as kind of a program management job. And then currently I'm working on still within the astronaut medical community, but I'm working at the IT enterprise architecture level to try and find new ways to use our data as a strategic asset and try and bring all those state-of-the-art types of analytics and analytical capabilities into better utilize our info. Okay.
So what's been your favorite job that you've had working for NASA?
Wow. Each and every one of them have different positive and negatives, I've worked for a couple of program offices that are new programs being, kicked off, and it's all very exciting when you're in the formulation stage and writing requirements and develop operational concepts and start, create prototypes and what have you. I think the most exciting, but also probably one of the most difficult jobs that I had was, you may remember the Constellation program that was started by Bush Jr., and then it was canceled under, first term of Obama. It was the Constellation program at NASA. It was slated to be the next Apollo on steroid program, if you will. We were going to go to the moon and then on to Mars, and we were going, pretty hot and heavy for 5 years between 2005 and 2010. And, it was really nice because it had a lot of the same excitement and fervor that, was during the Apollo program. And, everybody really thought we were going to go, and we had enough inertia, and it's very exciting times. And I was the engineering lead for the next generation of spacesuits for the space program. And that was hard times, but it was a lot of fun.
I bet it was. That's probably like every boy's dream growing up is working for NASA. I know I enjoyed space when I was little.
Yeah, I mean, it's boys and girls because half my team. I mean, it really was a good half and half breakdown between
was it?
Engineering between men and women. So at some points in time, there's actually more women engineers than men, depending on what time it were in the program. So it's a pretty neat, diverse environment now.
Yeah, and it's kind of like how it is in the sci-fi writing community too. There's a lot of really great women sci-fi writers out there.
Absolutely.
You gotta look out there. They're there and they're great.
Well, it was one of my big surprises that when I started writing was, I thought my audience was going to be, 20 something to 35 something men. Mm-hmm. And as it turns out, that's not my demographic of readers.
Oh, really?
It's women, and usually from between, say, 35 and 55 is a larger breakdown of my readers, which was a surprise to me. But, I'm good with that.
Right. I heard when you were on Hank Garner's podcast, the Author Stories podcast, you had mentioned that you always loved planes growing up. And I wanted to ask you, what's one of your all-time favorite planes? For me, I always loved, and I don't know why, I always loved the SR-71. Yes,
that's exactly what I was going to say. That has got to be the sexiest beast of an aircraft that's ever been made.
I love. I've seen one. They have one in Huntsville, where my grandparents are, at the Space Museum there, and they have one sitting outside. I love driving by, and if I have time, driving up there and just walking around it. It is such an awesome plane.
Oh yeah, and the fact that we publicly really don't know what its true capabilities ever were, it just, and the fact that they were able to build such an aircraft at that time, given the technology that they had, is just phenomenal. Yeah,
my father-in-law has actually given me a couple documentaries on it, and they're so fun to watch. It's such a cool plane.
Oh yeah.
So have you ever gotten your pilot's license?
It's funny you say that because, over the years, growing up and, as we all do, not all do, but, I think it's probably a familiar story. As a kid, I loved dinosaurs and thought, I'm going to be an anthropologist, or at the time I thought the right word was archaeologist, but it's actually wrong. So, I was going to do that growing up, and then, junior high hit, and I was all about airplanes, and I was going to be a pilot, and, go to the Air Force and be a commercial pilot, and yada, yada, yada. And that was a game plan. I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy, got my congressional nomination to go and do that. Then I was 2 points too low on the ACT to make it in. So, I decided, well, I'm not sure. In hindsight, it was stupid. I was like, I don't know if I really want to spend another year going through this process again just to kind of get my score up another few points. So, I'll travel with this performing group instead, completely 90-degree turn on that. So I traveled with an international performing group for a year, and then went to college. And when I was in college, at some point in time, I got sidetracked with, cool stuff like oil mechanics, and I never got around to get my pilot's license.
Ah.
So, I mean, it's just interesting the way it all turned out, how, and the reason I went to engineering to start with, aerospace engineering, is like, well, maybe I'll just get an engineering degree just in case being a pilot turns out to be too boring.
That's funny.
And somewhere along the way, I just got distracted with the engineering part and never actually ever took a single pilot's license, piloting class.
Oh, wow. I was in the Boy Scouts, and I got the, I forget what it was called. It was a merit badge, though, with planes. And one of the requirements is you have to fly. Mm-hmm. And so, you learn about planes and everything, and then you actually get to go up with another pilot and fly a plane. And that was so fun. I loved it. It's such that was a fun merit badge.
Yeah, being in a small plane with just you and the pilot, that's a completely different experience than, saying being a passenger liner or something like that.
Yeah. And see, for me, I hate heights. I have a big fear of heights.
Well, I was going to say, being a private pilot, being a private plane with just a pilot is, very different, but, stepping out of a perfectly good airplane like skydiving, which I've done on occasion, that's a very different experience entirely upon itself.
It is. I'm fine with flying, but I will never. My wife wants to go do skydiving, but I'm like, you can go by yourself, because if the plane's still flying, there's no need for me to jump out.
Well, if I hadn't done it tandem and had someone strapped to my back pushing me out of the aircraft, I'm not sure I would ever really made it out the door.
That's hilarious. I remember when we were flying in the plane for the merit badge, the pilot showing me, you turn this way, he's showing me how all the controls work, and he does this really kind of a hard turn on my side of the plane, so I'm looking straight down at the ground. And then he levels it out and he says, all right, now it's your turn to do a turn. Go to the left. So I turned the plane. We did the biggest circle you could probably possibly do in the sky, because I was not about to turn the plane that steep. It was fun, though.
Yep.
It's fun. So on to your books. You have a series out there called In the Days of Humans. For those that haven't heard about your book series, why don't you give them kind of the non-spoiler book blurb on what that is about?
Oh, wow. It's hard to sum it up into, a kind of a blurb. And, I always think my blurbs are, I mean, it's always like talking about your achievements. You're like, oh man, it sounds a cross between stupid and bragging.
Right.
No, it's In the Days of Humans. It's probably one of the best collections. Not best. One of my favorite groups of writing that I've done, and it's kind of a lot of the content in the book is, culmination of it, just kind of distilling in the back of my mind for 20 something years. And some of the elements, my close best friend from college, after he finished reading the first book, he's like, man, that's what we talked about when we were freshmen. I was like, really? He's like, yeah, don't you remember we went camping and talked about this, and this? And I was like, wow, you're right. I didn't even think about that, So it's been kind of bubbling there for 20 plus years, and finally made it on the page with this series. Mm-hmm. But the series itself is really about after the computer singularity occurs and, AI has become sentient, things don't go well. Mm-hmm. And the Earth kind of gets trashed. And that's chapter 1. The rest of the series takes place starting about 150 years after that. And, not to give it away, but a segment of the Earth is, through a series of fate of events, is able to remain relatively unscathed from what happened at the end. And they're rebuilding, and they are kind of the last bastion of human survival, if you will. And they discover that they're running out of all the necessary supplies and elements and what have you on Earth, because the rest of the Earth is pretty much uninhabitable. So they kind of go through a phase of what we did with the Apollo program, trying to figure out how we can get off this planet and live off the planet. And, it starts off with their exploration of trying to find, more resources. And as the story unfolds, some secondary environmental things start happening on Earth that weren't expected. And now it becomes a crisis to try and find some place to have yet another stronghold, or the stronghold of humanity, away from Earth. And it's a lot of even though it's science fiction, really the core element of the story is about the human element and the human condition and the relationships and the hard decisions and the philosophy that has to go in, to making your decisions. I try to make it as realistic as possible, but only use the science fiction and the technology as kind of a tertiary part, and sometimes plot mechanism, but really the fundamental part is the meat and potatoes of real life and the decisions we have to make along the way. Because as you know, in real life, there's the decisions that you're given, the options that you're given real time, and then there's a Monday morning quarterbacking that takes place, right? So sometimes when you have to make a decision, there are no great options. There's the bad option and the worst option,
Right.
So in a lot of ways, these are not Star Trek gee whiz science fiction books. These are, Asimov, Heinlein type flavor.
Where did your idea for this series come from?
It's an interesting question. May surprise you actually. Of course I work for NASA and have for pushing 18 years now. And, like with all jobs, not every day is sunshine and unicorns, so I was having a particularly frustrating day, and I was driving home from work, and, that's where I do a lot of my thinking when I'm driving home, listening to the radio. And I said, what if everything that I'm doing is just a waste of time, and we are not going to get the job done. The job being us figuring out how to live off this planet. Mm-hmm. What if we're just not going to get the job done? What if, European Space Agency is not going to get it done, and Canadian Space Agency? What if the Russians don't get the job done? Mm-hmm. And how ironic would it be if some other group of people would do it that we would just completely not expect to get the job done? And then my mind started wandering. I was like, well, who would that be? Who on the planet is probably currently people that you wouldn't expect to? And I thought, well, the continent of Africa, they don't really have a space program, do they? Right. And, while technologically they are just like any other European countries. I mean, it's a very large continent with a whole bunch of different countries. And I thought, what if they're the ones that actually get the job done? How ironic would that be? And what would it take to make that actually happen? Mm-hmm. Well, what would it take? Well, it would have to somehow the rest of the other space agencies and the rest of other countries and superpowers would have to be taken out of the picture somehow, right? Mm-hmm. So then my mind started wandering, and just kind of following each of these rabbit trails. And after a day or so of thinking about it, I thought, I'm going to write this down. And there's other things going on, in my work life and what have you. I was looking for some creative outlet, and I thought, I think I might be able to do something with this. So I just started writing on it, and 8 months later, I had a manuscript, 400-page manuscript. And then, originally it was going to be a single book. And then, after I finished halfway through the first book, I was like, no, there's more than one book here. And well, maybe there's two books. And after I finished halfway through the second book, no, there's at least 3 books of material here. So, it just kind of evolved, and it just I ran with it, and, very rewarding, fulfilling. And of course, like I said before, I guess there are other things I've been thinking about for 2 decades that finally kind of made their way onto paper. So, yeah. Did you find it hard writing the science that and that you've learned by working at NASA? Did you find it hard writing that so everyday people could understand? No, actually, that's kind of one of the jobs or one of the skills I've developed, I guess, as I've been working at NASA. Because, as in engineering, you have to work with a lot of different types of stakeholders. You've got your customers, which are the program managers and what have you. You've got to deal with budget people. You got to deal with legal office. You got to train the astronauts and get their opinions. And you have to write things in such a way that are very clear and logical and not up for interpretation. And that, coupled with the fact that we're not required, but we're encouraged to go out and talk to the public. Which, I can't tell you how many times I've gone out to schools from the kindergarten all the way up to high school to, college graduation ceremonies to, business luncheons, what have you. And just really talking to the public and being able to communicate very complicated and highly technical concepts and activities to a level that's appropriate for the audience. Mm-hmm. And, after doing that for over a decade, that's just kind of one of the skill sets. So being able to translate that in a way that's easily readable by a wide variety of different readers, I didn't really find it that difficult, to be honest, because that was just, that's just one of the things I learned how to do. And in the beginning of, in the very first book, you have this preface, and in it you say that you use some of the technology nowadays and kind of how you maybe see it going in the future.
Was that hard for you? Because a lot of times when people think science fiction and the science that goes into it and the technology they have, it's a lot of made up stuff. How did you go about blending what we currently have to where you think you might be able to see it going to where it actually seems realistic?
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, being done project and program management for a long time. And one of the things that you have to do is be able to look into the future and see problems that will increase the risk to your program, and then put into place things that will mitigate that risk. So it sounds silly, but being able to look into the future and see the future is actually a skill set of a good program manager. So, I kind of brought those things to bear. So, it kind of goes to the old adage, you can see the future if you understand the past, right? Because history repeats itself. Mm-hmm. And if you can kind of look back in time and see how things have evolved and how technology has evolved, then you can have a good indication of how it might be. And of course, occasionally you get these game changers that come into play that completely change, the direction of technology. Like if smartphones, I'm not sure anybody other than Dick Tracy ever really saw those things come into play like they have. Right. But one of the tenets that I want to do with my writing, not only just this series, but other things I have written is, they say, write about what you know. Well, the space program, I do know, and particularly the human exploration aspect of it. And because I'm a jack of all trades, I've moved around to many different programs and directorates and engineering tasks and operations and what have you. So, be able to write about that. And one of the goals I wanted was to make sure that I provided a realistic as possible experience to human exploration as possible without it being just mind-numbingly boring, because, you can't have write a book about going to Mars and have the book be 800 pages of, well, we're still on our way, another 30 days. You can't do that. So at some point in time, you got to throw a plot twist and, unobtainium, bit of unobtainium there to kind of move things along. But I want to make it as realistic as possible based upon the technology that we have today and would likely have in the future. Gravity plating, it ain't going to happen in the time frame of the stories I was writing with this series, but, extrapolation of 3D printing, that's possible, particularly if you can, backward engineer a little alien technology you run across.
And also in that, the preface of book one, you mentioned that while you were writing some of the events in the book, some of them actually took place in a way. Did that change how you wrote any of your story, or did you just decide to leave all those in there?
No, I left it all in there.
Okay.
That was really freaky. And, particularly the stuff that took place was not exactly some of the positive things that in the book. They're kind of the negative things that were the plot mechanisms that kind of facilitated the whole fundamental part of the book. So, when those started rolling out, it was quite disturbing to me, actually. And I thought, this is kind of like a nightmare playing out in real life. I didn't change anything at all, but I did make note of it because just so the reader realized, this kind of took place right before I hit publish.
Right. There's been one other author that I can think of off the top of my head that has actually had some of the events that they wrote about kind of take place. It's David Bruns. Has written his latest book is called The Jihadi Apprentice, and I believe some of the stuff that happened in that book almost mirrored some stuff that happened after they hit publish. And he ended up writing this article about how they dealt with that happening. It's a pretty interesting article to read. Yeah,
David, he's a nice guy, and he and a few other authors, we submitted short stories for an anthology to be coming out soon. It's a Halfway Home series. Mm-hmm. By Hugh Howey, mm-hmm. and or based in his universe of Halfway Home, and we kind of worked together and wrote our short stories in that universe that are all kind of 6 degrees of separation type of situation. They're all independent short stories, but there is this one point in time that they all kind of connect in one way or another. So that'll be coming out soon. But he was an interesting guy to work with.
Yeah. So is that Halfway Home? Is that part of the Future Chronicles?
It is, yeah. Uh-huh.
How did you get introduced to Samuel Peralta and the Future Chronicles? How did you end up getting involved in that?
How did that happen? I saw a story somewhere. It was probably one of the sci-fi groups, advertised by the writer Peter Caldron.
Mm-hmm.
He's an Australian. Forgive me if I got his last name wrong. We'll just try to do it off the top of my head. So it interested me, and it was I think it was Xenophobia, I think was the name of his book. So I read it, and I really enjoyed it, and because it's based on a story of the first alien encounter from I think it was based in Africa as well, if I remember right. So immediately he and I already had some common themes, because you don't often see sci-fi stories set in that environment. Mm-hmm. And I really liked it, and there were a few thoughts I wanted to pass along to him. So, I just sent him an email or Facebook message, I forget what it was, and we kind of started the conversation. And and he read one of the books that I had written, and he said, "Well, if you're interested, there's this other group of writers putting these short stories together." And so he introduced me to Samuel Peralta, that is, who's facilitating all those, the anthology series. And after a while, I got my name on the list and was invited to submit a short story. And that first one with that series came out with the Doomsday Chronicles back last March. Mm-hmm. And I've got Halfway Home coming out soon. And I've got a short story in the Legacy Fleet series that should be coming out, I think, sometime this calendar year. Okay. And then Samuel has the Martian Chronicle anthology coming out sometime in the first part of the next calendar year, which I've got a short story lined up for that.
I'm definitely looking forward to that Martian Chronicles. That should be a fun one. So your stories that you're writing in these Future Chronicles series, do they tie in with your book series at all, or are they kind of standalone?
They're standalone. Yeah, okay. They're completely independent stories. Like I said, with the Legacy Fleet and with the Halfway Home, they're based within the universes of those books. Okay. The Legacy Fleet is by Nick. My mind just went blank.
Nick Webb.
Nick Webb. Yeah. Yes. I can't believe I forgot that. I'm horrible at names. I mean, I can't remember my own name most of the time. Yeah. So those two short stories are, really within those two environments. The Doomsday was just, I highly recommend that Chronicle anthology to anybody, because when you think Doomsday, you're thinking like Terminator or post-apocalyptic, starvation and blah, blah, blah. And it's nothing like that. And I really think the authors that participated in that volume really kind of gave a non-traditional look at what Doomsday really means. And it's everything from, comet coming at the Earth, which is my story, and I can talk more about that if you like, to really kind of what like virtual reality might mean for the human species.
So where did you get your idea for your Doomsday Chronicle story?
Well, I kind of wanted to look at, in my mind, a good story. I mean, there are a lot of tropes out there, right? So, coming into the sci-fi arena, arguably 50 to 100 years after it started, you have to come up with new and interesting takes on things, because, the human relations and the human condition, it ain't changing that much. There's not new things coming up. So I want to take an interesting look at a doomsday scenario. And, while a comet heading towards Earth is not new, I wanted to tell the story through the eyes of, say, a 10-year-old boy. Because, with heavy topics like doomsday or, post-apocalyptic stuff, we typically only look at it through the eyes of adults. Because that's who our audience is, right? Mm-hmm. But I wanted to look at it through the eyes of a child, because, how they experience the world is, dramatically different than what you and I do as adults. And we forget that. And I guess, having now raised 3 children, that I'm constantly reminded that they just don't look at things the same way we do because they don't have the same experience base.
Right.
Which then shapes, your experience base shapes your reality, right? That whole nature nurture thing. And so how would the end of the world play out for a child? But I threw a plot twist in there at the end where, it's actually not the comet doesn't hit the Earth, but the comet does end civilization.
Okay.
And I won't tell you how.
You have to go read it to find out.
Right, you got to read it to find out, man.
Currently available on Amazon. So your book series, back to your In the Human Days series, did you know from the beginning you were going to self-publish that? And if so, why did you decide to go the self-publishing route?
Yeah, that's a good question. And every author has their own reasons, and mine is probably not unique in itself. But I have a full-time job, I had a young family, and when I first went to my wife and said, I think I really want to write a novel, and she was like, oh, "Okay." But don't worry, I'm not quitting my day job,
Right.
Not going to do things like that, So what that meant was, carving out time in my life. Some of it meant, quit watching TV, which I did. And that was its own journey by itself.
Right.
Because I was raised when you woke up, you turn the TV on and you watch TV, you eat meals in front of the TV, you turned it off, went to bed. That's just how the family worked. And for me to undo 40 years of habit was an interesting experience. But it also meant, staying up late, writing after the kids went to bed, and getting up early before the kids got up and went to work, and so it was and sometimes it meant, asking for some time on the weekend to get some stuff hammered out, so the idea was to try and minimize the impact to the family as much as possible, but obviously it's going to. So, the way of traditional publishing, the way it works, you got to get an agent, and then they've got to sell that to a publisher, and then, it works from there. But because the indie publishing has become so successful, they put a lot of market pressure on the big publishing houses, and the big publishing houses aren't taking a lot of risks. They're going with proven formats, with proven authors, or if they do entertain going with the independent author, the author has to have an army of readers already, coming into the picture.
Right.
And I was realistic about it. I was nobody, right? So I knew then that it would take 6 months to a year plus just to get an agent. And at that time, the big publishing houses were using agents as pre-screeners, right? So the agents were really kind of working in some fashion for the publishing houses as pre-screeners. So if you were able to get an agent within a year or so, and you'd have to have some manuscript ready for them to look at, then it would spend another 6 months to 2 years selling your book to the publisher, and then the publisher would take a year to get it ready to put on the shelf. And then they would run, typically a book runs for a year and a half, unless you're Harry Potter.
Right.
And then it gets backlisted, and they still own it for 30 years. So, if it takes a year to get your book written and ready, and then it takes a year plus to get an agent, now you're talking 2.5 years, another year or so to sell the book, that's 3.5, 4 years, another year for the publisher to hit the ground. So now you're talking 5 to 7 years before you get any indication if you have the sellable product.
Gotcha.
And I couldn't wait that long to find out whether I had the chops to do it, nor could I ask my family to give me 7 years before I really knew if I had a market viable thing. So I had to go with a path that would give me more immediate feedback, which self-publishing did. I went through all the processes, get a good cover designer, get a good copy editor, put your money where the most important things are, which is editing and book cover, and put it out there. And even if you don't go with a top 5 publisher, the mid-level and smaller publishing houses, they require you to do a lot of the advertising yourself. And so I figured, well, if if they're going to require me to do all the advertising and the marketing myself, then why do I want to bother going that route?
Right. Makes sense.
So that was the philosophy.
Yeah.
Long-winded version of the philosophy of that.
Right. So what do you have planned next for your readers?
I've got, like I said, a few short stories still that are going to come out with Future Chronicles, going to get those out the door. There are a couple of stories that I want to write, and I've got them outlined in fairly good detail. One has to do with Mars colonization.
Okay.
And again, keeping it realistic, and it portrays how it would realistically happen as far as colonizing Mars and how you would do it. Because a lot of what you see in the news, either whether via SpaceX or via NASA or what have you, it's based upon a paradigm that I'm not sure really reflects history. While, having SpaceX involved, the corporate aspect of it, they have pretty good model of how to get there. But as far as sustaining a colony, I'm not sure they've thought out that far, or even how to get, 100 people back. NASA, on the other hand, their paradigm is largely similar to what we did with the moon and the space station, whereas it relies on a logistics train to make it viable. But, if you really look at history, the role of, say, Christopher Columbus, he did not do that on commercial dollars. He had to go to the government, in that case Spain, to get backing. And it wasn't until several government missions to the New World actually took place and they were able to discover what resources the New World had. It wasn't until, and the technology of getting over there and the maps and, what have you, the shipbuilding, robustness that had to be developed. But as soon as all that was developed by the government and transferred to the commercial sector figured out a way to make money at it. Mm-hmm. And it was really the commercial sector that allowed permanent habitation of the New World, and also people learning how to live in the New World. Some of the first colonies, they starved to death, right? And Roanoke, they disappeared, right? Mm-hmm. But it wasn't until we learned how to live in the New World that making colonization was actually possible. So anyway, I want to take more of a realistic approach that kind of mimics history to the colonization of Mars. And, one, I want to do that just because it'd be interesting to read, but also, I have ulterior motives of maybe subconsciously when it gets out into the mind of the public, it will filter its way into, the commercial sector and also maybe the government NASA sector as a new way of thinking about how we should go at this so it'd be successful.
And what have you learned from writing your in the Days of Human series that you're going to take to your next project that will help you write better or create a better story?
That's a tough question. I think, along the way of writing, well, it's like doing anything. The more you do it, the better you get at it, right? Mm-hmm. Or if you're not getting better, I guess you stop doing it.
Right.
I'm going on the premise that I'm actually getting better at it.
There we go.
So, I think that's part of it. But also, I think that, that's a real hard thing because, getting better, what does that mean? That means, the nuances of writing style and the nuances of, finding, I hate to say finding your voice. What does it mean? I don't know. It means finding the style in which you're comfortable writing that flows naturally and, the characters that develop without being formulaic from book to book. And it means, each type of book has a different style that should be addressed and, how it's put together and the acts that you include and, the pacing and all that kind of stuff. I think that all just kind of moves from book to book. But also, I think as you write more in a particular genre, you find not only what works, but also what's been done so many times before. And you can kind of carry that knowledge of just being exposed to that forward to make something that's new and interesting, I think.
Well, here at The Legendarian, we like to end our podcast on a segment that we call The Legendary Ending. So these are just kind of some random kind of non-book related questions that we're gonna ask you here. The first one is, what songs are currently on your writing playlist?
Oh, geez. I think a lot of what I write is, intense stuff, right? And kind of like when I was in college, I could never study with anything that had vocals in it. I'd always have to study to like classical music or new age or something like that, where it's just kind of in the background and help me focus. So a lot of this intense stuff that I've written recently, I had intense background music playing. So it's not by any particular artist, but there's a few like YouTube channels and Pandora channels where it's like 3 hours of epic music or something like that. And I just hit play and just let that play in the background. So,
okay. If you were stuck in a zombie apocalypse, which one of your book characters would you want to be stuck with and why?
Oh, without a doubt, Tarday.
Okay. Why?
Without a doubt. Because, wow, she's kind of like a cross with I'm going to give some spoilers here. So if you don't want a spoiler, just tune out now.
Right.
Come back in 30 seconds. She's kind of a cross between Laura Croft and some kind of kick butt ninja. I mean, she is just the ultimate strong female character. She's troubled. She, has abilities that she can't explain why she has them, and they're kind of manifesting themselves late in life. And if you're in a zombie apocalypse, man, you want to be about 3 steps behind her, because if you're any closer, you're going to get covered in blood.
That's funny. And if you could choose if you're stuck in a zombie apocalypse with any character from any media source, comics, books, movies, whatever, who would you want to be stuck with and why?
Oh, wow. That one's more difficult, I think. Yeah, I don't know if it'd be Hancock or the Hulk.
Okay.
I think maybe the Hulk, because like I said, he'd probably do all the heavy lifting for him, and he's much more pissed off about the whole situation than I would be, I think.
Exactly. That's funny. Let's see. If you had a time machine, where would you travel and why?
Oh, wow. Where would I go? I think that, based upon my job, I would definitely go back to when NASA was given the task and the charge to go to the moon. I think, while we've done some fantastic stuff since then, just the level of intensity and urgency and excitement and doing something that's just almost beyond human comprehension, and just, really developing physics as we're going along, man, that has just got to been a hell of a ride and just a awesome party. And, I was lucky enough to have a couple of Apollo engineers that were my mentors the first 5 years I got there before they retired.
Oh, wow. And
just the stories that they told, I mean, they were all people in their 20s. Most of them were just in their 20s themselves. So, I mean, they were literally making the stuff up as they were going. And, not only they work hard, but they played hard. They said most all of them were single, and, at Friday afternoon, they would walk down the hall, and, the engineers would pick up the secretaries, and they'd all head down to the beach and just party all weekend. And, it's just got to have been a heck of a time to live.
That's awesome. And if you could have one superpower, what would it be and why?
Definitely not predicting the future. Yeah, that's a lonely job right there. Right. Let's see. What would I think it would be, all my life, probably sharing too much. All my life, I've always had dreams about being able to be telekinetic, be able to move things with my mind. And, I've had an awful lot of fun in those dreams. I think I'd probably do that. Just not because I would be a superhero, but just kind of screw with people, I think.
That's funny.
Just kind of, all of a sudden their cup moves across the table and they're like wondering what in the hell's going on,
That's funny. And so the question that we're kind of famous for here, a penguin walks through that door right now wearing a sombrero. What does he say and why is he here?
Okay. hey, whoever's got the black truck out front, you're blocking my motor in. I've got to get to the races.
There we go.
I don't know.
That works. Before we leave, do you have any advice, whether it be for writing or for life, that you would like to share with our listeners?
To sound like Nike, I say just do it.
Okay.
Just do it. Just do it and keep working at it. And if particularly writers, if you've never written anything, just do it. And your first time is going to be an utter train wreck, but that's fine. Find people that will give you honest feedback and double down and learn about the different areas that you have challenges in, and just do it and keep doing it. And, I've, achieved a lot of different things in my life that are fairly significant. And I can honestly say I'm not sure there's anything I've done that's been more personally fulfilling than writing, and the feedback that I've gotten from authors from readers. And, having a reader say, I really enjoyed your book, that is very fulfilling. To have created something with your own hands and have someone say, I really value that. But to have a reader say, not only do I enjoy your books, but I want to buy some and give them away as presents and gifts. Oh my goodness. I mean, that's a level of satisfaction that you can't even really explain unless you've been there. So just do it.
And where can our listeners go if they'd like to learn more about you or your stories?
I've got, my own personal website. You can just go to terryrhill.net. And it's, my books, my works, my random thoughts are there. I'm on Facebook. And if you go to anywhere online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple Books, Kobo, Books A Million, if you type in Terry R. Hill, it'll pop up. And of course, on Amazon, I have my author page, which you can click on, and it gives you a summary of all the different books and short stories and stuff that are available there.
Sounds good. Well, we'll throw links to all those in the show notes over at legendarium.com for the listeners to check out. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come on 30-minute author interviews. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Preston. I thoroughly enjoyed myself.
Thank you. Well, guys, that's all the time we've got for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to 30-minute author interviews. We hope you come back next Wednesday and every Wednesday for a brand new episode. Head on over to legendarium.com. That's leghghendarium.com, and check out the show notes for this episode. Terry R. Hill is giving 3 people the chance to win a signed book from him. This giveaway will run until Tuesday, December 13th, 2016. And until next time, guys, remember to stay legendary. Oh, screwed that one up. Blooper reel.